my spirit to his spirit to my spirit, brothers and sisters in spirit and in humanity, I am Hildegard. I come to you in the spirit of truth, to speak the way of my spirit that will be the way of his spirit. Let me get back on my experience and my life and dimensional density where you are today. Very young, I lived the light of the spirit. I escaped, as some of you do today, this density. I found again, very young indeed, the worlds I have been often impossible to describe in words. I lived alone, which no one could explain to me, that no human history or no human experience had consigned. What I lived at that time could not in any way explain, not even be reported otherwise than on the inside than at that time. It seemed to me more appropriate to be, at least in suitability, the ideal of what I had vivid. From the outside, the place where I was, where I lived, was called rapture, ecstasy, absence, or even epilepsy, for some doctors, or possession. What were those words about what my consciousness was immersed? Of course, the translation was this amount of musical knowledge, the nature of the invisible worlds, I spent all my life to consign. I'm not here to talk about it because it's affordable. I came before, witness, by my presence, by the vibration of my presence and, above all, trying to get in shape with you, process, beyond words, I lived then. At a precise moment of my life, where anything seemed possible, I decided to leave me, some dive mode, and for that, I dove in myself, not in the flow of thoughts, or in any sadness, but was then in diving in myself. I have not found better expression, as if I decrease. I followed this decrease as expected. At the end of this decline, I would disappear from this world. I seemed to focus my consciousness on one point. I wanted to blow me at this point to that point disappeared, or that I had more to go out there, even in this world. In this reduction process, there was no trouble, just be sure to disappear entirely, sure not exist. This point, I had first imagined behind my eyes, but the point remained ever. Then, at the end of a time that I cannot determine, I decided to disappear for another point here that would not go away. So I decided it would be in the middle of my chest that maybe I could disappear. I observed, first, that this point was pounding and my consciousness was beating in the manner by which I breathed. So I decided also not breathe. And a blow, a single, I lost consciousness that point in this body and this same breath. So, effectively, a scam, I no longer existed. At the same time I had the impression that everything disappeared. I found myself in another place, in a state where there was no longer the slightest chance of holding on to whatever it was. There was no breath, body and more. However, it was not anything because, little by little, to blow me into something that no words can translate. My consciousness became what I wanted. Of course, what attracted me more, initially, were the sounds I could not find. I was not this body, I was not anywhere, and focusing on me that sound, I became that sound. The sound is modulated and then I became this modulation. This modulation has become a color, non-existent where I came from, and I became this color. The ways I could guess and not see, I could also become often triangles. I realized me so that I could become, literally, everything was there. Very quickly, then, I said, I, who did not want to exist, behold, I exist in the whole. So at that time I sent what I would call a thought, but rather a tension that, for me, in fact I had just left, evoked perfection. I put myself to evoke attention to the Son and then to Christ at the same time. And there was what I would call, in human words, a detonation, an explosion. I then became the Son and I then penetrated something that was not me, I was convinced, but I became instantly. When I say that I became, was not I, but I was him in his flesh, in his memory, in his spirit. An experience that no words can translate. So I decided it was not really all that I had become, but what I wanted then was to disappear. And at that moment, I heard a word echoing in your body. That word I can translate the sea, and then, instantly, I became the whole, if I can express that word so simply. So, I go through extremely violent feelings, I would call them so, even today, an extreme intensity of sounds, shapes, colors, worlds, different consciousnesses in which, literally, I was. At that time, it had not yet, in my head, the possibility returned, to find whatever matches the experience that I have just expressed. Of course, today, wherever I am, this experience is known, was experienced and described, much better than me. At that time I did not try to describe what it was indescribable, under penalty of being burned, so I decided, in my life, impregnate me this experience I had the chance to drive, this time without wanting to disappear and translate it the way I transcribed. This state has been described and the most appropriate expression I can find would be the dissolution of the ego, the realization of see and at the same time, the final dissolution. I tell them that when my first coming, so collective, among you, to tell them that all life created, all existing life, all existing consciousness cannot be lost or disappear. It can turn. She can go call so if they want the infinitely small to the great whole. That's exactly what he prepares. Each of you will become what you created in your own consciousness. Remember the beginning of my story, I put the point where I wanted to blow me and disappear first, very logically, in the head. The only place where I could really live what I had designed was the center of my heart, there where it breathed, wherever it struck. I know now you know everyone, even without realizing it truly, that the essential works there, this central point of his heart. I told them also concentration. The total annihilation of consciousness at this point leads to the whole. So a particular archangel, as Uriel spoke to them reversal. A Melchizedek spoke switch. I tell you that abandonment to the light and attention or concentration at this point leads to infinity, and that extract from the world that I wanted to draw me, having understood at that time that was an illusion, thereto, allowed me, however, live, at this point, this alchemy. The passage of the infinitely small, the fact not be anything in this world leads to all be elsewhere. I understood too because I had studied and understood the life of Christ, which already expressed as a result, of course, countless consciousnesses that released. In fact, you cannot release being attached to whatever end, above all, you cannot break free while they are attached to yourself. It is the negation of life, but its own understanding and their own experience of what I called, following Christ, the Renaissance or the Resurrection, because it's exactly the same thing. You should disappear entirely in the space of a moment, this reality, to take the other side. You are greatly aided today by all that the solar system and send them ourselves. But it is only you who can do very little to no longer exist anywhere, except at that point, and move then to the whole. This abandonment is truly an abandonment of everything. It is necessary, as I told you the Archangel Anael, give. It is a precise mechanism of consciousness. It is a vision of the spirit. Yeah, I would say, attention, but attention that is not the order of the will, but a strain of the spirit for himself. What is happening in the solar system for all consciousness is exactly the same. The reversal, I express them, it will also be yours. The experience that I just tell them, it is not just the story of an experience, but even more, a screen that you need to recall the state of being, when coming, or when you decide to take that final step. The big difference is that today you do that being informed in several ways from other realities, other worlds, other dimensions, but the path is strictly the same. Become like my sister said Santa Teresa in your life, the lowest among all. Only merging this smallness, this insignificance, as she said, you realize everything. Intellect is exactly the opposite, as it is not open to this truth of the heart. On the other hand, I demonstrated, returning from my experience, that access to true knowledge, at the time, was instantaneous and direct the heart. It was not the intellectual knowledge, or knowledge that you would call today esoteric or initiatory, but effectively a direct and instantaneous knowledge reaching the heart, the place where I went. Because, since the passage is performed, it is possible to absolutely all. At that moment, you become creators of their reality, here as elsewhere, because you are not limited to here. His consciousness fully invested in this one. So therefore, you're limited, and you still believe, in this body, these functions, this personality, but now and already, your consciousness has always been multidimensional. We had all just collectively forgotten. They made us forget. So your consciousness exists in this body, in this life, but it exists simultaneously in all the bodies and all the lives that you have this array, not in the past, not in the future, but now, just as you they exist in your light body or his immortal body, the state of being of body, of all eternity. This is what is progress now for you. In this illusion, you are present everywhere, effectively, at the same time. That's what you will reveal. It is not a creation, but truly a revelation. That's why you can only access the consciousness, called pure and released, accepting or drawn entirely, what you believe to be. Extract is not to delete or die, it's totally the opposite. There is really the light vibrato that now falls on continuous flows on this earth, that does identificare a role, a function, to identify the truth that is absolutely not what common sense suggests them. Moreover, the silence of the senses, the silence of outdoor activities is the way to lead you to your inner being. There, brothers and sisters in spirit and humanity, which wanted to share with you, the vibration of my presence. If there is in you, specifically with regard to this process of consciousness, not mine, but also yours, questions, that I will answer. Question could again develop on the multidimensionality? Brother in spirit, it is extremely difficult because, as I said, the words are very fragile, extremely limited by own brain, because the brain will not ever access to multidimensionality. What has access to the multidimensionality is precisely the consciousness that disentangled brain. The best description is that I gave them, no other. You become at the same time the shape, sound, color, you become all shapes, all colors, all the sounds, all the songs, you will make the star, the atom, the flower, you become the light itself, Christ himself. In short, you become what your consciousness is. And your consciousness is exactly what she decides. It is impossible, by the words, make them even envision what it might be. Some archangels and some Melchizedek or some sisters have the ability to make them approach, in this body, this condition, called presence of state or realization of C. It is a first draft, and I say yes outline, what is multidimensionality? The best way to get there is, as I said, just identify, that is, become small, smaller and smaller, until no longer want to be whatever it is, at the same time being fully in life. It is the only way to get there. Describe, which is impossible with the words, vibratory states of consciousness itself, would not be of any help because the words are very fragile. If you expect to put it into equations, Even if some of its scientists come here today, the equation is not the experience, understanding even less, the description even less, because only consciousness can live it and certainly not the intellect. Question: you can develop what is repulsion under the star of Mary? That's exactly what I express through my experience. This repulsion is what allowed me, the initial experience of annihilation of my conscience and my presence in this world, to live what I lived. Repulsion referred to is neither the evil nor the fact of being in repulsion with respect to an element or an event. It is a transcendence of repulsion. I called this tension for annihilation, this tension of the spirit, this abandonment to light the gift of himself. My sister Teresa would have called it the very negation in consciousness, call extreme humility, without going, as some lived until flogging or other bodily abuse to serve nothing, strictly nothing. It's only a consciousness of attitude that leads to it. That's the repulsion. On the other hand, repulsion, I could call it the ultimate attraction, one in which everything is solved, that is, the final return to the source. Back himself again, be the entire source for a way, and yet the word is fragile, mimicry or overlap, it might be the right word. Once again, this word cannot be understood through your brain, in dynamic terms, only by opposition to the well or attraction. Once again, the words are very fragile. Look, for example, what was called the star vision. When you speak of you tend to speak of ocular vision or an interior vision, but vision is much more than that. It is not only the vision as to understand the brain and senses. Here's what I can tell of repulsion. In short, in my life, I had succeeded in leaving literally confinement in the triangle that you called Luciferian, to transcend my own condition. What I lived, in a unique way, will live today. When the Eastern mystics have said that everything was in the interior, is the strict truth. There are even in this body, in the very interior that you are, all the worlds. I do not know who said that if the whole matter of universes and dimensions to focus on a single point, this would be no bigger than the head of a needle. I penetrated the head of the needle. Question: why do you have a brain that bothers to achieve multidimensionality? Sister in spirit, is not the brain that bothers you, is the very architecture of the brain. Without going into the details, you are in a low vibration body or low density, very heavy density where, even before the fake, opacity and compactness were the rule, without however to block access to the other side. There is, therefore, to judge your brain responsible, but rather the conscience, which was confined. The brain is only the realization of this confinement, not at all, but in some ways. There is, therefore, creating brain that limit the whatever. The brain is created for a purpose and for a dimension. Consciousness exists in all dimensions. Question: to live what you lived, you need to devote a maximum of time? I never spoke the words, since this initial experiment came way as for many beings to live it. Want there to lend a while, want to borrow something there long, it is a mistake. All those, without exception, brothers and sisters in spirit present on this humanity, which held, at various times, made it instantly. Instantly. There is therefore a way, is a mechanism of consciousness. As you stand on the illusion of believing that it is a path, you will not live this consciousness. It is the mind that believes and who created it. Without exception, whatever traditions, peoples, cultures, without exception, those who lived it instantly. It is precisely the moment that the consciousness accepts that there is nothing to look outside that is produced. It is exactly the opposite of the proposition formulated. Question: how can you live this process in today's society? But I answer, as I told you the Archangel Uriel, what you want to become. And above all, what you want to be. There's no question of bringing this state to flaunt it in this world. It is not something that is acquired. It is not something that can conform precisely to this world. It's a choice. The choice when going to this consciousness, as showed all who were before you, made them have, however, persisted for some long time, this illusion. Each in his own way tried to convey the teachings, the fragments. It is the mind that thinks so, as always. The mental is belief. Consciousness is experience. The mind can never solve the problem of experience, because it is not the experience, it is belief. Consciousness is freedom, is the mental confinement. There are other possible output, no. And, at the collective level, the set of brothers and sisters in spirit will have to make that choice. You have it done now or in the last moment, is, ultimately, always the same choice: containment or freedom. But freedom cannot live remaining confined. You must first live freedom. We gave them, and each other, too many elements, the words, the vibrations, for many years, but, definitely, we always said that only you are who can take that step. There is no any obstruction, mental order, saying it is not compatible with it, is not compatible with my life. So at that moment, life changes. While the mental is derived and stuck to the fears, fear of failure, fear of not being inserted in this reality, it just does translate the fear of change. This fear that told them Sri Aurobindo is a mental secretion. The shock and shocks are to live and you will live, can only increase the secretion of fear and then lead them to the last drop. I called this tension. In short, the unit, multidimensionality is proposed to everyone without exception. But to accept and access multidimensionality, we need to mourn the renunciation of this eyes, even mentally, knowing that it is an experience. In the end, when you come back before the end, the mental always there, but you he exceeded. While the question arises is that the mind does not want to drop and that fear underlies. It is the same principle that can exist in what you call, I believe, today, extreme sports where you need to overcome fear. But fear not ever win the mental. It can only be overcome through what I have just expressed. If you analyze with the mental, what happens today, the very question you have just put is the perfect and complete illustration of the mind that refuses to let loose, because he cannot conceive and accept that consciousness exists independently of mind. Question: I find it difficult to get there as you arrived. All this is here, too, only the mental and exclusively mental. The vision I have, where I am, it would become, in other words, not then see any offense, pathetic and dramatic. What is pathetic and dramatic is the mind and not you, sister in spirit. Question is then as simple as blowing out a candle to delete it? The image is perfectly found. It is necessary that the tension of consciousness, translated by drop, leaving the light, is total. Mental always will do everything to stop them. It's his role. We have no more questions. Appreciate. Brothers and sisters in spirit and humanity, please accept my blessing. I tell you later.